Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome back to The Tide Machine. I am Charles Branch, joined as always with Michael Southern. It's Georgia week, and we will get into the Alabama-Georgia series here very shortly. But Michael, we got a bit of news earlier this week, figuring out who our annual opponents are going to be over the next 4 years before the SEC reviews it again. Alabama will be playing Auburn, Tennessee, and Mississippi State, which for some was a little bit of a controversial pick between Mississippi State and LSU. But there's a lot of history between Alabama and, of course, every program in the SEC. So thought we'd kick off this episode with your kicking it off first with your thoughts of just Alabama's new annual opponents starting in 2026 and for the next 4 years.
Well, I think the SEC office got it right this time. I know there was a faction of fans out there that were clamoring that we should stick with LSU, but honestly, I think they got it right on multiple levels here. From a historical perspective, because let's be honest, Mississippi State is the closest SEC school to Tuscaloosa. I mean, it's literally an hour and a half away. It's closer than Auburn. Alabama has not played any SEC school more than Mississippi State until after this year, and then Tennessee will be tied with them. I think they'll both be tied with about 109 games each because we haven't played Mississippi State. It'll be 2 years that we skip over them. And from a competitive balance, this makes sense. I mean, if you give Alabama, what people are asking for, if you give them LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee, that's a tough challenge. But let's not forget too, it's not like LSU is going to go away. Alabama's going to play LSU every 2 out of 4 years. But I really think that this is the most equitable decision by the SEC office. If you look at the way most everything played out, it made a lot of sense. It would have been the equivalent if Auburn had gotten Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. So, they get Georgia, Alabama, and Vanderbilt. That makes sense. I don't have a problem with that either. But historically, it makes sense to play Mississippi State. I mean, I think Alabama's played them since I think it's like early, like 1896 is the first time they played. They've got that history with them. And again, from both historical and competitive standpoint, they made the right call. And look, I will say this. LSU fans think that Alabama's a rival. I don't know if Alabama fans really consider LSU a historical rival. Yes, the games have been great and competitive in the last 10, 15 years because of the Saban angle. But again, there's not a long tradition that Alabama fans consider LSU a long-standing rival, at least not from the group that I hang with.
No, I think pre-1992, all those SEC members, we've played so many games against each other that there is some type of rivalry, and one may covet it more than the others. The Alabama LSU rivalry has definitely grown since the turn of the century, obviously sharing one coach in Nick Saban, playing each other in the national championship game, alternating national championship appearances and titles over the past couple of years. So I understand from more of a recency that Alabama fans or younger Alabama fans would have liked to have seen this yearly game against LSU continue. What a lot of maybe younger fans don't realize is Alabama went 30 years not losing a game in Baton Rouge.
Yep.
Lost in 1969 and would not lose again until 2000 down in Baton Rouge in Death Valley. In this NIL era, I think it's important to get some rent relief from all the rent that we continuously have to pay down there when we go down and beat LSU. So I think this is a great financial decision from the SEC to help Alabama, which, I'm sure Auburn fans are clamoring about it. Allows us to send more money down to the SEC offices for officiating as well. So continues to be a win-win for everybody. But I agree, Mississippi State's proximity, playing them 108 times. I think it's good. I was disappointed when we did expand to 16 teams that we weren't going to be playing the likes of Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Arkansas and some of our typical Western opponents, but specifically Mississippi State because of the proximity and because those games have been very, very good in the past. And I look at it from the LSU side too. LSU in their 3 annual opponents got Arkansas. You're not going to get rid of the Golden Boot game. They got Ole Miss, which there's a lot of history between those two programs as well. and they got Texas A&M, which I know is a newer rivalry or a newer game, of course, with Texas A&M recently coming into the SEC in 2012. But that's been a game that's been very attractive, has been very competitive, and honestly, I know the discussion has been between LSU and Mississippi State. I'd almost offer up that maybe the discussion should have been between Mississippi State and Texas A&M because of the connections both of those programs have with each other. Bear Bryant, of course, Gene Stallings, Dennis Franchione had really good games between each other as well. And that would have given LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, Arkansas. We would have then, of course, had Texas A&M, Tennessee, and Auburn. And of course, that gets into the competitive advantage or disadvantage as well that the SEC was trying to alleviate or at least to make a level playing field as well. So I agree. I think the SEC did as well as you can when you got 16 teams and you have a league with this much history and trying to make it fair and balanced. I look at Tennessee's three annual opponents. They get us, of course, but then they also get Kentucky and Vanderbilt, which there's a lot of history. There's a lot of rivalry between those three programs. And it does disappoint me that we won't see Tennessee and Florida on a year in, year out basis. We won't see Tennessee and Georgia on a year in, year out basis. But of course, that's just comes with this conference expansion and this race to try to get as many dollars as you can. But I do think the SEC did a good job, not just for Alabama, but as well as they could throughout the entire SEC of figuring out these annual opponents for everybody.
You know, to me, it just felt a little strange last season because that's the first time I ever remember that Alabama didn't play one of the Mississippi schools last year. They didn't play Ole Miss and they didn't play Mississippi State. And then, the last time Alabama and Mississippi State had not played was like back in the 40s, I think like 47 or something like that, right after World War II. So it really to me felt so weird not having at least one of those schools on the schedule. And look, Alabama fans travel well to Starkville. They like that trip. It's an easy trip for them. You can just drive over and drive back, and they'll always have a good contingency that goes over there. So I am glad to see Mississippi State get back onto the schedule with regularity. And like we said, it's not like any of the other remaining teams you're not going to see. You're going to actually see them with even more regularity than we've seen in the past, back when the SEC only had 10 teams and you only played 6 conference games. I mean, there are some huge gaps between some of the teams that Alabama very rarely ever faced. So you're gonna see Georgia pop up in there 2 out of 4 years, LSU 2 out of 4 years, Texas. So it's going to be a pretty good rotation coming on. So there is no dodging anybody. You just get a 2 year respite out of 4 years against certain teams.
No, and with the expectation that both Alabama and LSU are going to continue to compete not only for conference championships, but national championships and try to get into the 12-team playoff, there's still, no guarantee that we won't see them in an SEC championship game or in the college football playoff at some point. So that we will still cross paths, whether it's in conference or potentially in the postseason. But I think the SEC did a pretty good job with putting everything together as far as conference play in the future.
The one last question before we move on to Georgia is I didn't get a chance to check this because I was really busy today, so I was a little bit behind. But I could have swore I heard in passing or whatever that the playoff committee or the playoffs decided to stay at 12 teams. Uh, they have not decided to go to 16. I need to confirm if that's the case. But how ironic, the SEC goes to 9 games, and then the playoffs going to stay at 12. So Big Ten played the SEC really well on that one.
Well, and I know that for at least for our non-conference schedule, we have a lot of our games already set up, basically through 2034, maybe even further
Yeah.
than that. The ACC, as they have expanded, I know they have had member ACC schools play each other in non-conference games. So conference opponents, but not going against the conference record. I know Wake Forest and North Carolina did it for several years to keep that rivalry. I believe even North Carolina State and Virginia played each other this year in a non-conference game. So maybe that's something that we see in the future from some of these SEC schools where somebody drops out or having trouble filling a non-conference spot that you actually play a conference opponent in a home and home series, but it will not affect your conference record for that year.
I've seen that happen before, but that just sure feels so strange when that happens. And I believe the SEC dabbled with that off and on some years ago, but that's just really really strange. I
Yes.
mean, I always feel like if you're playing an SEC school, it should count. No matter how many games on the schedule, it should count.
Well, speaking of SEC games that count, we will have our first SEC game that counts for this year. We are opening conference play against Georgia this week in Athens between the hedges, a game between what has been the standard of college football, both the Alabama and the Georgia program. I know the Big Ten feels like they rule college football right now with Ohio State and Michigan winning the past two national championships. But I think if you went around the country, every program is still trying to copy the success that Alabama and Georgia have had over the most recent years. And it's our first time to really dive into a series that has some depth to it and not just being 5 or 6 games. Alabama and Georgia have played almost, this will be the 70, no, I'm trying to do math on the fly real quick. I did go to Alabama. This will be the 75th Alabama Georgia game. I did that very quickly, so I got a good education, everybody. Everybody should go to the University of Alabama. This will be the 75th game between Alabama and Georgia. Alabama leads the series 44, 26, and 4, and also leads the series in Athens with a 15 and 12 record. This has been a highly anticipated game and has had some matchups, of course, not just in the regular season, but in the SEC championship game and even in the postseason as well recently. Three games that we wanted to talk about, just as far as, either meant a lot to us or some really fun Alabama experiences playing over in Athens was the 1985 game, 2008 and 2015. So we'll start with 1985. Michael, I know you've brought up, the 1985 game or a lot of those players from when we talked about our favorite players last week, which if you haven't listened to that episode, as I said, finish this episode and then go back to that one. But tell us a little bit about that 1985 game, which was a thriller at the end.
Yeah. So one thing I want to mention: the three games that we're going to talk about, the three games that were in Athens, there was a lot of there was a lot on the line for Alabama because all three established credibility for three different Alabama teams. In 1985, Alabama opened the season. It was on Labor Day night. It was a nationally televised game, but Alabama was coming off basically, they were coming off a 4-7 season. They it was 1984. Ray Perkins struggled in his second year, had injuries to Kerry Good. They did finish strong when they beat Auburn in the 17-15 game, but there was a lot of concern about 1985. People were worried that 85 was going to be a repeat of 84. What could this team do? And if not for the way Alabama finished that game, it had the makings of maybe perhaps another disastrous season just because of the late things that happened where Georgia took the lead. Alabama comes out defensively; they dominate the game all the way up until like the last 2 minutes of the game. And Chris Moore gets a punt block, and next thing you know, they're up 13-9, and the next thing you know, they're down 16-13 with less than a minute left. So I was watching the game. I remember I almost went crazy when they blocked the punt. I was like, oh no, you can't, this cannot be happening. I was just sitting there shaking my head like, no way. Cornelius Bennett and that defense pitched a whale of a game against Georgia. They blocked the punt though. They take the lead. And I'm sitting here thinking, oh, we're going to have a repeat of 1984. Just every bad break you can think of happened to this team. But it didn't. What happened is you saw that 1985 team show the fight that it had. Mike Shula and that team, they came right back down the field. They answered with quick passes to Al Bell, Greg Richardson, and of course they had the game winner to Al Bell to take the lead back and go up 20-16. And that was the start of many comebacks for that team. I mean, Shula led a comeback to tie the game against LSU later that year in Death Valley. And of course, the memorable drive to set up the Van Tiffen kick. So I think that medal for the 85 team was really established with what they were able to do in basically the last minute against Georgia. In retrospective, had they not been able to do that, who knows how that season turns out. But they did. And you see what happens. They bounced back from a really terrible, frustrating year to go 9-2-1, and they beat Auburn 2 years in a row. They beat a great Texas A&M team that year too. I think the Texas A&M team was I think they won the Southwestern Conference that year, and then they destroyed Auburn in the Cotton Bowl. So there were a lot of big wins, and it was all started with that 1985 victory in Athens on Labor Day night.
I'm glad to hear that you were also very disappointed and very frustrated by punt block at the end. Um, I was not born yet. I was not born until 1989, but my parents were dating during the 1985 Alabama football season. And as the story goes, at my dad's apartment over in Homewood, just below Vulcan, my mom and my dad are over at his apartment with some friends watching the game, probably feeling the same thing that you were, that we've dominated it. We've dominated this game. We're coming off a bad season, really want to start on the right foot. And as you mentioned, Chris Moore gets his punt blocked. The story goes that my mom, sitting on the couch watching that game, jumps up and yells, "Oh my gosh, they blocked it. They blocked it," and proceeds to go out into the balcony, just yelling at the top of her lungs how Georgia has just blocked the kick. So, fortunately, Mike Shula, as you said, led a great drive, one of many comeback drives from that season. But just for anybody who wasn't aware of my family or my mom, her blood definitely runs crimson, and she let it out after that blocked punt against Georgia in 1985.
Hey, that again, that was a wild game, a game that you thought Alabama, there's no way they're going to lose. Then they looks like they found a way to lose it, and then they come back and find a way to win it. Seems to be a pattern playing Georgia.
It seems to be a pattern, and we'll get into these next two games a little bit, but I wanted to mention this too. Um, there was a lot of talk about Alabama losing some of its swagger against Florida State, or just that invincibility, whether it was Saban leaving or just how they looked in that game. This is, and I think this game last year, I think the game in 2015, where Alabama was coming off the loss against Ole Miss and then beat Louisiana Monroe, a lot of, and even the SEC championship game with Jalen Milroe, the SEC championship game with Bryce Young and Jamison Williams and John Mechie. This game has always been billed that this is the game Alabama's going to get knocked off the throne and Georgia's going to take sole control of it. And even though Georgia would eventually knock us off for the national championship, you still, to me, and of course I'm biased as an Alabama fan, I never really felt that Georgia had really claimed that throne from Alabama as being the best program in all of college football. And where I'm going with all this is all of Georgia's, if you go back to 1985 game, Alabama and Georgia have played 19 times over the past 40 years. Alabama leads that series record 13 and 6. Um, excuse me, 13 and 5. So they've played 18 times over the past 40 years. Georgia's victories in the series have been a 17 to 16 victory in Athens, a 27 to 25 victory in Tuscaloosa, which talked about Lane Bearden last week as one of my favorite players. If he's healthy for that game, we probably win that game because we shanked the punt very late.
Yep.
2003, Georgia won 37 to 23. They were up 30 to 3 at one point in that game. We had a couple defensive touchdowns. That's the game. Croyle got knocked out. Spencer Pennington got knocked out. Brandon Avalos played. I just watched some of that game. I don't, we didn't have a lot of scholarships at that point. We were still dealing with probation. When you think about third string quarterback, you can't think about what we have at Alabama now with Alex Mack and Keelan Russell. Appreciate Brandon Avalos and everything he gave for the program. He was not prepared to play quarterback at the college level. But continuing on, 2007, the game in Tuscaloosa where we lost 26 to 23 in overtime. And then 2021 where we lost 33 to 18, but really that was a much closer game until Georgia got the interception for a touchdown. All these games that I'm looking at, Georgia has gotten a late break, or that game in 2003, we basically were playing with an arm tied behind our back, and we weren't a good team at that point. Georgia had David Green and was number 11 in the country. I think going into this game that Georgia's got to beat Alabama, but they've also got to beat their own mindset that they can beat Alabama. Because we've seen what Alabama has done in this game. And we'll start with the 2008 game, the blackout game, where Lee Corso, uttered the great phrase, that dog is ugly. Um, I was a sophomore at Alabama, and I remember the hype going into that game. One of the more unique stats that I find from that game is the first catch of that game was BJ Scott. That was also BJ Scott's last catch as an Alabama football player. His career, he had two catches for 7 yards, and that play went for 7 yards. And you may remember this too, when BJ Scott committed to Alabama, he did a great job recruiting, helping recruit a lot of those guys that would be part of that really first class that Nick Saban had that full time that he had at Alabama. And I think was a number one recruiting class as well for that class of 2008.
I think, and like anything else, it depended on the service. I think ESPN had him third, but other services had him number one. And you're right. I remember BJ Scott. He came in as like a 5-star athlete. It wasn't thing there is they never found the right position for him, or something that just worked for him. It's just an odd fit, and I hate that it didn't work out for him. And I think you're right; he was very instrumental in getting a lot of those other kids to come along, those highly rated recruits. But in 2008, Alabama kind of set the tone. You thought they did with the win over Clemson, but after the Georgia game, then there was no doubt the Alabama team was for real, and they were forced to be reckoned with. I mean, I remember that first half. I mean, you're up 31-0 at halftime. You have the nice pass to Julio from John Parker Wilson. You have the team just running straight up the middle on them. I think you also had a tipped interception by Dante Hightower. So it was just a dominating first half. Now they got a little sloppy in the second half, punt and return and things like that. But you could tell Alabama was all business. They weren't worried about the crowd; that they were just focused on the task at hand, and you could see exactly uh, how they prepared for it, and it worked out beautifully. Again, all three of these games set the tone for the season, and I think we may have another situation for that, obviously coming up this Saturday.
Well, and what I remember from that game too is that first drive where I mean, like you said, the first half we dominated Georgia. We were up 31-0. And that was a Georgia offense that had Matthew Stafford, No Sean Marino, and AJ Green. But that first drive that we had, we're moving the ball against them. I think it's a 3rd and 10, and we hit a little slip screen to Glenn Coffey that he would have gotten a first down on the play, or maybe he might have actually been short, but he got hit and fumbled the ball inside the 10-yard line, and Georgia recovered it. But on the play, Georgia roughed John Parker Wilson on the pass. And you just think if, one of the criticisms of Mark Richt teams at Georgia was they were very undisciplined. You think that if they don't rough John Parker Wilson, how much differently that game could have looked, because we got the touchdown on that drive, we kick a field goal, and then it was just that second quarter was just methodical. I mean, it felt like we were on Georgia's side of the 50 the entire second quarter. Jim McElwain called a great game. We ran a draw to to Roy Upchurch to make it 24-0 that Georgia was totally unprepared for. And like you said, the pass towards the Georgia sidelines that Julio Jones caught. And, I know you'll never forget all the facial reactions of the Georgia fans that ESPN was catching during that game as well. All the drop mouse and sad puppy dog eyes for most of the first half.
I remember the lead up to the game when they were talking about, it's a blackout, it's a blackout. I remember listening to Coach Stallings on one of the local radio stations, and they asked Coach Stallings' opinion about, hey, what do you think about Georgia doing a blackout? And Coach Stallings did his usual answers like, well, I'm actually glad they are talking about it, because if they're worried about what they're wearing, they're not worried about the game. And so it was very prophetic from Coach Stallings, and he was absolutely right. You mentioned Roy Upchurch. He doesn't get enough credit in 2008 and 2009 for being the third back, and he was a changeup back. Roy Upchurch's skill set was hard to describe. It was just different, and if you used him at the right time, the defense he just had something that the defense is just they were like, oh, I wasn't expecting how he moved there or how fast he really was or how he could cut. He was a perfect changeup to throw out there as the third back at times, and you could see that happen in 2008 and 2009.
And he was a guy who I know he battled a lot of injuries throughout his careers too, but of course, saved the 2009 season catching
Oh
that ball
yes,
flat from Greg McElroy.
yep.
Hmm. And I had forgotten too that like we said, we dominated Georgia. They did make a run, made it 31-17. We would eventually stretch it out back to 41-17 with 4 minutes left. They got a touchdown, an onside kick, and then another touchdown before the game would eventually end to make it a little bit closer, 41-30. You have some games like that where you wish you would have really put it on them and kept the lead as it was, but that was definitely a memorable night because felt like sitting there at halftime, like this game is over. And I've not witnessed many Alabama games, especially in games like this between number 8 and number 3, where the game's basically over at halftime.
No, no. I was remember watching it, and even at halftime, I was still in a little bit of shock. I was like, because remember, we're coming off some very mediocre Alabama teams. You're not used to seeing Alabama just beat down a top 10 opponent in their house like that. But again, that was the precursor to the Saban dynasty. And yes, we got spoiled because we got to see that quite a bit over the next 17 years.
Well, speaking of beatdowns, kind of like we said, similar situation as far as what this team may be going through right now. That 2015 game in the rain. There was a lot of talk about Georgia, finally getting Alabama, revenge for the blackout game, revenge for SEC championship game that was 32-28 there, where they caught the ball on the tip pass and fell in bounds and the clock ran out. And that was a game that we didn't start off well. We did get the stop, but to start the game, but our first offensive possession, Derrick Henry fumbled the ball, which is something that he did not do much at Alabama, and it was just kind of a sloppy game until we hit Richard Mullaney down the sidelines a couple times, and then Derrick Henry would eventually break one to make it 10-3, and then we got the block punt with Mika Fitzpatrick to make it 17-3, and then we hit Calvin Ridley for a deep pass to make it 24-3, and you go into halftime, and here we go again. Alabama's got a big lead and opened the second half with a defensive touchdown and just really kind of just never gave Georgia a chance, which is something we've seen a lot with Alabama, where they can just turn a game so quickly in these big games and take the life out of it and roll on to another victory.
So I remember the post game in 2015 when Saban came out and he gave the ordinary and extraordinary men summation, and that was really good. I remember that and I listened to that. But you're right; they were coming off the loss to Ole Miss. They were an underdog, what for the first time in quite a while, going into Georgia, and everyone, all the national pundits were saying the dynasty is now over. The dynasty is over. Ole Miss started it. Georgia's going to put the finishing touch on it. And then Alabama just came back, like you said, after the first series, a little sloppy. It was raining over there that day in Athens. But once Alabama broke the ice, it just seemed like almost a repeat of 2008. Georgia couldn't stop the onslaught. It seems like, Alabama, the key for Alabama, and I think it's the same thing for Saturday, take the ball first and score on them as fast as you can, and then just shake them up a little bit. If Alabama can do that, then let's see what happens. Because it just seems like once Alabama breaks the ice against Georgia, gets one touchdown, and gets it back, it just seems like Georgia. I don't know. I don't know if they get tight, but you can tell that it's bothering them, and they're starting to not maybe panic, but they're rushing a little bit.
If they don't get tight, their fans get tight. And
Yes, absolutely.
I think that bleeds in from the stands onto the field. Because I know you've been at some of these Alabama Georgia games. I've had the opportunity to go to a couple of these SEC championship games between Alabama and Georgia. And you can feel it from these Georgia fans that when we take the lead or things start going our way, even when they're winning the game at time, they just never feel comfortable. And I think what I was talking about earlier, I think that is a big component of this game in this series is can Georgia beat Alabama on the field and can they beat Alabama in their mind as well? Can they actually believe that they can get over the hump and beat Alabama? And they could. Georgia's obviously a very good team coached by a former Alabama defensive coordinator that we know in Kirby Smart. So I'm sure he's pulling out all the mental tricks that he can to get his team ready, but you got to like our chances that you continue to play this game close, keep it as a one-score game, especially going into the fourth quarter. It's going to be a lot of anxiety in Sanford Stadium that could definitely creep in to that team, whether they're wearing red or black on the sidelines.
No, it again, this is going to be very interesting to see how this game plays out. Again, this is a different coaching staff. This is a huge road test, and last year they didn't do very well on the road. I mean, LSU is the only game that you can really classify that they had a stellar performance. The other times, not so much. Now, I feel confident that Georgia has their attention and they will be focused. So I don't think motivation is going to be a problem. Execution, obviously, is going to be the key. So I like Alabama's skill position players. The question is, can that offensive line hold up long enough to give Ty a couple of clean looks? He starts hitting a few darts down the field. That'll really loosen things up a bit. So very curious to see. Very curious to see how this plays out within the first 3 to 4 possessions of the first half.
Well, and as much criticism as Nick Sheridan got last year as far as his offensive play calling, he was dialed in for that Georgia game, and I don't think he was surprised at all that our team was up 28-0, at least from the offensive side, that we were doing what we did. He put a great plan together, and I'm sure he's helping Coach Grubb put this plan together this week as well. One question that I asked the M3 show, and I'll ask you as well. Do you think Coach Kalen DeBoer blacks out the game on the sidelines this week and goes with
Yeah,
the black hoodie?
yeah, I'm pretty sure he's gonna be wearing that. I'm sure no coach will admit to like, hey, yeah, pay attention to the streak, but I feel confident he's going to come out wearing that. If he comes out wearing a red polo or crimson polo, people might get a little upset or a little worried. I'm pretty sure he's going to be wearing the black though.
Yeah, I think after the first week, I'm hoping Kalen DeBoer has learned he just needs to be himself. Don't care about what you're wearing on the sidelines. Don't care about what your attitude is. Just be you. And that's what's gotten you the Alabama job. So I'm very excited for this Saturday because a lot of people have pointed to this game as far as, the next test for Alabama. And I think we've done a lot of really good things against Louisiana Monroe and against Wisconsin. Win or lose, I am expecting us to play well and to play focused and to play inspired. I don't think we're going to have some of the effort issues that we had against Florida State, but I expect it to be a great game. And at the end of the day, I obviously hope that the Crimson and White of Alabama comes out on top.
Yeah, same here. I think we were talking before we started recording. I really think Alabama's going to have to get this game in the 30s or above to win this thing. If it stays low scoring, I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that.
It'll be fun for sure. Saturday's a great day of college football. If you're a golf fan, one, you should be listening to our new Crimson Crossover podcast, Golf Adjacent, but also you got the Ryder Cup leading into that as well. It's a great day to sit back and watch a lot of sports. So hope everybody enjoys their Saturday. Alabama will be on ABC at roughly 6:30 Central Time. They sometimes like to push those times a little bit further back. But very excited to get into it. Michael, do you have any parting words?
No, I just think we've recapped it pretty well. And again, I'll be watching like everybody else. I'll say this. During all the years that I covered Alabama football, which was quite a bit, I never got anxious, nervous, had anything like that because when you're actually covering a game, your mind is focused on the task at hand because there's a lot of things you have to do. You're charting plays, you're looking for trends, you're writing down notes for the follow up at the post game. But when you're just watching it as a fan, that's when you get stressed. So yeah, I'll be stressed out on Saturday like always.
Well, it should be fun. We want to obviously wish the best of luck to our guys, and hopefully they'll make it 45 victories between the hedges on Saturday night. So we appreciate everybody giving us your time and listening to the Tide Machine. Make sure you come back next week as we dive into our series against Vanderbilt, as Vanderbilt will be coming to Tuscaloosa. But Michael, as always, thanks for being with us. And this has been another episode of the Tide Machine. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
The Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.